Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to PCA's Garage. This is Tech Tactics Live, episode 42, and today we're going to talk about some of the things that I really like, and it goes back to me and my car stereo days 30 plus years ago. But today we're going to be talking about dash cams, talking about stereo upgrades and technology upgrades. So a few housekeeping items. We want to thank Pirelli, our sponsors, who are the ones that make this available or make Tech Tactics Live available. Make sure you make sure you subscribe, and if you're watching us live tonight, make sure you comment, because we'll be taking questions from the audience, and you can do that in the live chat area. Tonight's guests, we have the CEO of Westminster Speed and Sound, Mark Miller. Now, we go back a ways, but we didn't really know each other very well back in the day. I've known Mark for a while. I've known about Westminster Speed and Sound, and the reason why I say we go way back is because we were in the industry, the car stereo industry, the heyday, the golden age of car stereo, early 90s, and I even brought, check this out, I brought my 1992 just to flex a little bit. This is my first place award for winning 101 250 watts in my Mustang. And this is a more recent trophy from my Mustang. This would be the loudest stereo in August of 2014. So I've been in-car audio. I've been installing aftermarket systems in my very first car, which was a Pontiac Fiero, and started competing there. I think I have some photos from when I was competing at East Coast Nationals, and then I went on to work for different car stereo companies. Yeah, that's my Fiero, that's East Coast Nationals. And you'll see a pretty elaborate install. That's from my Mustang and center channel. So I love this stuff. I still have that Mustang, and that system there is still pretty good, even in today's standards. But we'll see some technology tonight and how far some of this aftermarket stuff has come along. So let's get into the agenda, if you don't mind, Robert, and throw that up so everyone knows what we're going to cover tonight. So probably the more serious of the technology that we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about dash cams, what to look for when purchasing, pros and cons of self installs, portable installs, a fixed installation, the difference in pricing. There's a pretty big difference in pricing of dash cams. You can find $99 ones up to some sophisticated $100, $1,000 cameras with different angles. And then we're going to get to the fun part, which I like, is aftermarket electronics. And we're not just talking about stereos tonight. We're talking about technology upgrades, as Mark put it, where you're integrating modern things into maybe an older Porsche. Like, we don't think of a 997 as an older Porsche, but when you talk about convenience from Apple CarPlay, Bluetooth, and all that kind of stuff, they don't necessarily have them. So what are your options? So back in the day, speaking of options, and I'll pull this out proudly, this is my pull-out stereo from back in the day, the Alpine with the famous green chiclets. You remember this one?
Yes.
So back in the day, when it came to car stereos, it was single din, din and a half, all that kind of stuff. Well, we're going to talk a little bit later in the car stereo section of what kind of things you can do in your Porsche when it comes to audio. And unless it's like a 993 or older, this is not going to be sort of the size that you're going to be dealing with. You're going to be dealing with a custom size, right?
Right.
This is a radio from Porsche Classic, which we'll talk about. But let's get into dash cams and why it's important, and we'll illustrate the importance of a dash cam with a video. Robert, you got that video queued up? So here you see that is a very vivid green light. You are driving along in your lane, green light, and we're going to play, and you'll see what happens. Green light, and you see that car there just took a left in front of you, right? Now the driver gets out, and the driver may actually believe that they had a green light when they made that turn, and you'll see that person,
what are you doing?
And actually the passenger too, they are actually getting out and arguing the fact and saying that you hit
I had
them
the right of way.
when in fact they had a green light.
You
Well,
turned.
if you didn't have a dash cam, it's your word against them. And when you get into the insurance world, the insurance world doesn't have that much time to sit there and listen to your version of the story versus their version of the story. And what they're going to do is just say, okay, well, your insurance, take care of it, and their insurance will take care of their side, and you move along. Well, that's actually quite negative. Why don't you share a little bit more on that end in terms of the liability?
Well, I think the biggest thing is if you haven't done anything wrong, is a dash camera can prove your innocence. And I think that, you know, there's just example after example where somebody has a video that they can show a policeman in an accident. And they say, no, your officer, this is actually what happened. And you can pull the video up on your phone lots of times if the camera's got Wi-Fi, and you can prove your innocence instantly. So think about the aggravation and the amount of hours that you save by solving that problem instantly.
And one of the things, I have 2 young drivers in my family, and one of the things that I worry about is, you know, they're good kids, they may or may not do something right, but if they were to get into an accident, I always worry that the person that hit them might take advantage of the fact that they're a young driver and kind of bully them into making the poor kid think that they were in the wrong when in fact they weren't. So this is a great way to capture what actually happened. And if my kid's in the wrong, I'll pay for the damage. I'll do the right thing. But there are unscrupulous people out there that will try to take advantage of that situation. And a dash cam is just one of the many ways that you can protect yourself, protect your family, protect your insurance rates, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different options. You can, people always shop online for things. Obviously retail, you being with Westminster Speed and Sound, you are a retail outlet, a brick and mortar place. Let's talk about purchasing a dash cam. What are the things that you can recommend to our viewers, what they should be looking for?
So I think the biggest thing is just make sure that the capacity of the dash camera from a storage perspective, they're almost always going to use a micro SD card. So just make sure that the micro SD card capacity is decent, right? If it's not 96 gigs or higher, the problem that you're going to run into is that if your car was sitting in a parking lot and somebody hit it and you didn't notice it for a day, but you didn't have hardly any storage capacity, there's the potential that it could overwrite.
It'll overwrite the footage that you needed.
Right. Yeah. So better dash cameras have more sophisticated motion sensors and impact sensors that can lock out a window of time for you. So like the one in the Macan will lock out 20 seconds before and 20 seconds after. So even if you went 3 days and then you noticed it, it's not going to overwrite that. So you could go back and you could view that.
So something that triggered a question was, you're talking about in a parked situation. I've seen a lot of dash cameras that aren't permanently mounted and they're plugged in to a cigarette lighter. So a lot of cars, when you turn the cars off, the cigarette lighter doesn't have any power anymore.
Correct.
I'm guessing those cameras do have battery backup?
Most of them don't. There are some that'll have them for a short period of time, but that's a good thing to know, is that, and from my perspective, I want it recording when the vehicle is turned off. I want a dash camera that can monitor the voltage of the car. So if the car sits for a long period of time, once the voltage drops to a certain point, the dash camera would shut off and stop the current flow.
Run out your battery.
Correct.
Oh, okay. And that's the other thing is, the resolutions on these cameras too. I would think most of the time your car is going to get damages when you're not there. Like we talked about the incident with the going through the traffic light. Obviously that's a very useful, situation to have it. But a lot of times us Porsche drivers were worried about people dinging the doors, parking in a parallel parking spot, someone backing up into your bumper or in the front or in the back, or someone walking up and keying your car or something. Like so if there's some sort of motion or glass breakage, that's when you want it to record. And if you don't have a system that can run with the car off, then you might as well not even have a dash cam.
You're right. And if the camera itself doesn't have good low light resolution, so think like original iPhone to a new iPhone, how much better it can focus at night. So when we watched that video, I don't know if you noticed, but the resolution that we were seeing there, if you had to actually pick up on the person's license plate and they rolled, you might not have been able to read it. A really good dash camera is going to be able to pick up on a license plate even when it's pretty dark outside, which might be the difference between finding the person and not finding the person.
So being into cameras slightly, like there's like a lux rating or something like that?
Yeah, but the variable is manufacturers will lie with that. You'll find a $20 one that says it's got a .1 lux, but
it's not necessarily. Right. Okay, it's marketing lux.
It's marketing lux.
Marketing
there you
lux.
go. That's a good one. Yeah.
So you should do your research to make sure it has good low light capabilities.
Yeah.
And then are most of the cameras now, I guess, 1080 or 4K or what?
Yeah, as a general rule, they're going to be HD grade or above. And the reality is that if you're recording at 720p most of the time, right, which is the lowest level of HD, you're going to have more storage capacity in your micro SD card.
Right.
So you can pick that. Most of the time at 720p, you're fine. And a lot of the back cameras, so like in the Macan, we've got a rear-facing camera as well. Most of those record at 720p.
Okay. Well, you brought a 2017 Macan GTS, gorgeous by the way. Now, Mark is not only our guest tonight, but he's also a PCA member and watches Tech Tactics Live, gets e-brake, gets Porsche Panorama, watches our YouTube stuff. So thank you for bringing the car, but the reason why he brought the car is he's got a lot of things on here that we'll talk about, and Damon is filming or showing you the dash cam that's mounted, and that to me looks like a permanent mount.
It is.
And that has a forward-facing camera at that location. But I think, Damon, if you swing around and look at the back, the rear window has the rear-facing camera.
Correct.
That is different from some of the dash cam kits I've seen where there is a camera, front and rear-facing camera on the front unit.
Right.
And why do you choose what you have versus what?
That's a great question. One of the variables is that if the camera can get mounted in this vehicle, if it can get mounted in the back, the variable is you've got many more options on aiming it properly. So if you're in the front and it's aiming in the front, odds are by the time it's seen through headrests and everything else, you've lost 50 to 60% of your capacity to look out the back.
Point.
And there's less light. Right, there's going to be more light if it's viewing directly to the outside.
Right, and if you're trying to see like a license plate that's following you or something,
100%.
it's like not the right angle, right?
Correct.
Okay, so that camera, just roughly, that is hardwired, which I think between you and I, we talked about and we said we prefer hardwired. Like I've looked at dash cams before, and I tried to talk myself into getting a dash cam that I could take from car to car to car.
Right.
But there really isn't a good, I mean, you can make it work, but then you've got wires dangling, which annoys me when I'm driving. And then you have to deal with, does it have power when the car's off? So I've come to the decision, if you're going to put a dash cam in your car, do a hardwired one, good quality one, get it mounted, get it aimed, because it's not that much more expensive. What did you say the retail on this camera setup was?
That camera is $300 retail, and it was $240 to install it. So you're at $540.
You're at $500, which isn't chump change, but it's also, just think about the insurance savings that you might have, like in that one incident there.
No.
If all of a sudden, they say you each pay your deductible, that's, could be a $500 deductible, could be a $250 deductible. There's a lot of ways that can pay itself with one incident.
And I think that the biggest thing to keep in mind is that if you buy an inexpensive dash camera and it doesn't do its job properly when the situation arises, it's a complete waste of money. So the reality is, I tell people either buy a better one or leave your money in the bank.
Exactly. And the feature on this one that you showed me earlier is it has its own Wi-Fi capability so that you can connect your phone to it. And you showed me a live recording. You showed me, different chapters, so to speak, of what it was recording. You showed the front angle, the rear angle. So if something happens, we all walk to our car and we take the long way around to see if there's any dings or scratches on it. And if you do notice something, you can immediately review the footage to see who was around the car.
Yeah, and I think things to think about is how many times have we had a piece of electronics and we like the piece of electronics, but the graphic user interface or the way it operates, it's so poor that you end up wanting to just throw it at the ground. So The better dash cameras as a whole are easy to operate. So when we were in Wi-Fi mode, we can change the input sensitivity, we can change at what voltage it shuts off, right using the app that you download to your phone, which is easy. So anybody can be taught to use that in about 5 minutes.
So in the, I guess, range of inexpensive to super high-tech dash cams, where does this?
That would be what we call like the mid-grade of the better ones. So it's our best seller. If you're buying a front-only view camera, $200 is probably the minimum, $250 to $300. You can then get into cameras where a forward-facing only is $500, and then you've got to buy the rear-facing one. So that's why we like that one at $300, and you're covering both ends of the car. And we've sold this camera for 2.5 years, and I think we sent 1 or 2 back, so that they've figured out the reliability on it as well.
And so the rear camera, is there a cable that's going back?
There is. So it's hardwired, so it's hidden inside the vehicle. Yes, sir.
Okay, very cool. So what about, I think you probably chose this because it is a bestseller. It's a great way to show your customers. What do the features of the really expensive ones have?
So what happens is when you move up the ladder some more, that's a 1080p camera. You can get into 4K cameras. You get capability for higher storage capacity. You will get the resolution just gets better. The low light resolution at nighttime, its ability to focus in dimly lit environments. You will get some cameras that will do Wi-Fi, some that won't. You're starting to see ones that'll do LTE. Like if you want to go hog wild, you can buy 4 camera systems with an LTE or a cellular internet module in it, and you can effectively record it, store it in the cloud. So you could be in Florida and you could get a notification in Maryland, and you could pull it up and see it, right?
Right. So back in the day, I had an alarm on our minivan, believe it or not, that had cellular capability, so that I got it so that I could unlock and lock the door, start it. But if the alarm were to go off, it would actually send me a text message.
Correct.
So now technology today is kind of taking it even further, where you're sending video and saying something's going on with the car, and here's the video.
Right.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So again, going back to portable versus fixed, I mean, are we just going to say, let's not do portable because it's just not going to...
Well, think about it from the perspective of the portable. When you mount it up there, are you going to stop and look at the image that it's viewing to make sure that, like in that Porsche, you've got to go far enough to the right of that overhead console so that the left side viewing angle isn't being blocked, right? Are you gonna fire it up every time and look at that? Or and you're not. If you're in a hurry, this isn't a portable radar detector.
Right.
So I would tell you, get it installed. The reality is, if somebody sold this car, they would pay us an hour's labor to take it back out. It's 2 hours to put it in, but it's an hour to take it out. Now you move it to another car.
To your next car.
Correct.
Okay.
In your new minivan, too.
Thanks. Minivan lovers unite. All right. Well, let's go to some of our questions here we have from our audience. Actually, this is more of a point than anything. Is if you have a dash cam, they said make sure it works. That sounds pretty obvious, but what's your thoughts on that?
What we were talking about. Make sure it works. And if you don't test it ever, what if 18 months from now it quit turning on? What if 18 months from now the SD card got corrupted? Well, you're up a creek.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my mom, who drives another German vehicle, she asked me to get her a dash cam because she drives quite a bit, which I did. I did a little research, and this was like maybe a year or 2 ago. And I came across one of our local members had one in her Cayman that she autocrosses. And so I got the same one for my mom, but it was a portable one. And when I went to visit her a few weeks ago, I saw it like on her shelf in the kitchen because she just didn't like having all those wires dangling around. And she was more worried about someone smashing her windows because they saw that she had a dash cam and then of course she probably did take it with her a couple of times as when she started doing that, but then after a while she's like, oh, there's just such a hassle.
What about the suction cups falling off from the extreme temperature changes? Ugh.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we those that run radar detectors, have that issue too, where if you're using a cheap suction cup and you wake up and it's cold and it's sitting on your dash, and you don't know what it cracked on.
You were very happy when Blend Mount came out with those mounts connected to the rearview mirror. Absolutely. Yeah, they're great.
If you want a more solid mount, that's a good one. What was the other thing I was going to ask? We talked about pricing, we talked about purchasing, portable versus fixed. This one. This one is sort of an awkward question / statement. and we have to answer it carefully. So we definitely want a dash cam to record to assist us in making a point of who's at fault. And usually we're trying to prove the point that we are not at fault. But what if you get into a situation, whatever it might be, and it records that you are at fault? Then how does the law look at that? we don't have to answer it, and maybe we don't want to answer it but there's something to think about. Like, if you tend to do things not legal, just remember that dash cams are going to record things that you want it to record to protect yourself, but it's going to record everything.
We just created Porsche Gate now, right?
So always do good things while you're driving your Porsche, especially if you have a dash cam.
And a PCA sticker.
Yes, exactly. There's a question here. What about heat load for those that, say, live in Arizona, Florida, and park their cars outside and...
Great question. The better products are designed to handle extreme temperature changes. So they're designed to work when it's 30 below. They're designed to work when it's 120 degrees. I mean, I imagine if it gets 130, 140, it might shut off, but they're designed to handle big temperature swings when it's better product.
Okay, very
good. Great
good.
question.
Good. And this will be probably a similar answer when we're talking about installation for aftermarket electronics, but when you go to find a professional installer for your dash cam, not everybody lives in Maryland, or otherwise we would go to you, but what would you recommend them look for in an installer for a dash cam? So
the biggest thing that I would say is what you and I had talked about earlier is I would say you can reach out to your local chapter and you can find out if through networking, is there somebody that they know that's known for that? As a general rule, in most major markets, there are people that are known to work on European vehicles that are audio people, right? Okay. So you've got guys that specialize in F-150s and Silverados, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a great market. Yep. But then you've got people like me that do a lot of Porsches and BMWs, and so we understand these electrical systems.
Right.
And there's people
you know
like
where
me.
The tabs are in the ceiling,
right.
How not to break them, right? And what I would also recommend for those that don't necessarily know who the best person or best shop is in their area is ask your local PCA region.
Right.
Much like Mark, he's active in the region, and when people ask somebody else in the Chesapeake region or the Potomac region, his name or Westminster Speed and Sound would probably come up. So no matter where you are in the US or Canada, check with your local region because they probably know who works.
Somebody knows.
Somebody knows.
Somebody knows.
Just like if you were here.
If you had a 996 and you need an IMS bearing done, somebody in that local chapter knows who to do it. It's going to be the same scenario.
That's what we say.
Yes,
that's why PCA is a great $46 a year resource. You like how I did that?
Yeah,
nice
good.
little plug
That's
for PCA
good.
membership. Okay.
And it's on sale tonight for $46.
$46
right?
all year long. And I think it's $46 next year too.
Oh, okay.
All right. So how about dash cams in convertibles?
Yeah, that's a great example. So my convertible is a BMW M235i. So I put the same camera in it. Mm-hmm. So I have the forward-facing camera in a similar spot. I have the quote-unquote rear camera facing into the car, because I can't use it as a back camera per se, because the rear window goes down when the top goes down.
Okay.
So what I'm using that for is if somebody breaks into the car, or God forbid there's a carjacking, I've got the video of that.
So I'm assuming that car also has like a factory rear view camera on it, the BMW?
The BMW has a backup camera that we added.
Okay. So could you, I'm sure you can, because anything's possible, probably would be a little bit more money, but to integrate that rear view camera.
Typically, you're not integrating the factory camera. There are some companies out there that make dash cameras that have the capability to do basically a waterproof camera in the back if you want.
Oh, okay. I got you. And then in the back.
Yes, sir.
Gotcha. Okay. Very good.
Great question.
All right. I think you talked about this, but we did have a member ask about, do these systems save images remotely?
There are a few companies that are doing cellular data. The popularity is growing really slow. There are a few of them. Most of them are going to be stored directly on the card, and then you can view it. But that's the best way that I can answer it.
Are there companies or cameras where, when it comes to a recognized Wi-Fi network, that it would connect and then maybe upload?
There are definitely some commercial products that do that.
Oh,
I don't know of
products.
any consumer products that do it now, but the commercial products I was telling you about, absolutely, because the commercial van pulls back into,
Like
into
your Amazon van or your FedEx van,
and
or
all of a
UPS
sudden
van.
it uploads automatically.
Okay, so
Yes, sir.
I would think that sort of capability is probably going to trickle down to consumers at some point.
I would say it would. I think the biggest variable is going to be, do you need that? And that's what you've got to decide, right? So, and what is it doing to the cost?
Okay.
Because for me, first thing that I want is a quality picture, and then I want a quality product. And then the third level for me would be maybe something that could store it in the cloud.
Okay, so just kind of to wrap up dash cams, if there's any other questions as I wrap this up, just put it on the live chat here and I'll answer it. But once it's installed, and we're saying let's do it hardwired, front camera, rear camera, now from a day-to-day side, do you just pretty much get in and drive and not even remember that it's there?
Correct. Yeah, this little guy, when you get in the car, like if you've been out of the car for less than 6 hours, when you get on it, it gives you this little message verbally that says, video recorded while parked, to remind you that it was recording, right? You can shut that off, but
Right.
I sort of think it's cool because I know the thing's working.
Right,
It
that's
turned
good,
on.
exactly. And like the member mentioned and you mentioned, is every now and again you probably want to just
Correct.
make sure that everything is working and the angle that it's recording at is good.
We had a client that we sold a camera to, and 2 years went by, and something happened, and it wasn't major, and he went to pull the data, and it wasn't there, and the reality is the card had gotten corrupt, and he had never looked at the card in 2 years.
Oh, wow.
So that's just a bad idea.
Yeah, so thanks for that suggestion online,
Yeah.
and always check your stuff. And you did mention this system here is front camera, rear camera, but there are side cameras available if you wanted to.
There are side cameras, but that changes the cost quotient completely, because you've got to get the camera to the outside of the vehicle and underneath of the side view mirror something. So you could take a system from $500 to $2,000 in a
Okay, because
heartbeat.
now you're talking about pulling door panels, running wires from the door into the side jam.
Correct.
A lot more labor
A
involved.
ton more labor.
Possible, yes, but just be prepared to pay.
And you're
a bit
getting
more.
such a wide angle of view on these products that, yeah, there is a dead spot. If a guy could manage to walk directly up to the door from the side from far away, it would never show up. But typically he's coming at an angle, or she or whoever, and you're going to pick him up on the camera.
Now, is there, you know, in say a Tesla, even Porsches and my mom's Mercedes SUV, there's like this bird's eye view. Has that been available in sort of the dash cam world?
Somebody has tried it, and it didn't work the greatest in the aftermarket, so I don't even know if they're still producing it.
Okay.
We talked about that a little bit earlier, more of like what we call the 360-degree cameras.
Right.
The problem was that when you mounted it up front, you had to put it so low in the windshield in order to view the side windows that the rear deck of the car, the rear hatch of the car, made it all you could see in the back was the sky. Correct.
Yeah. Okay, so the angle to capture all the way around with one camera, technology's not necessarily there yet.
It's not there.
Okay, gotcha. Well, hopefully that answered a lot of your questions for dash cams, and now we're going to get to what I really love, is talking about stereo and technology upgrades. Now, again, going back to our 90s era with upgrading cars, it was pretty straightforward. Like if you had an old car, you had a shaft radio, but the opening could be kind of cut out to be a single DIN size. This is DIN size. And this is my pull-out radio, as I said earlier. And across most of the manufacturers, they had this DIN size. So you could go to your stereo shop or whatever and upgrade whatever you want. And every radio that was made was this size, and you could just put it into the dash. Then say like GM's became DIN and a half.
Right.
And then as you got fancier cars with equalizers and graphics, you got a double DIN radio. But still, that was like 3 sizes. And then once you get into the 2000s, so in Porsche speak, when you were in the 996, it was typically a single DIN, sometimes a double DIN. You go to a 997, now the dash is very specific to the car. And same thing with other manufacturers. In the 2000s, stereos became integrated with the dash. Then you had things connected to multiple buttons on the steering wheel. You had things that were, your radio station was displayed on the gauge cluster. So it wasn't a simple matter of pulling out the universal sized radio that had everything in it. Now you had to go into what I call integration, and the car stereo world changed quite a bit, in the early 2000s, and moved more into integration and talking about technology upgrades. So, we'll talk about stereo upgrades for those of you that want better sound in your cars. But then technology was, we started getting conveniences with our phones, and we wanted that integrated with our cars. Apple CarPlay, or even before Apple CarPlay, just being able to stream my Pandora. Instead of having a CD that had 20 songs, now you had Pandora, now you have Spotify, and you want a Bluetooth input somehow in your 87 911. How do you do that?
What about a USB port?
Or a USB port
a backup
to charge,
camera, just things that we all take for granted.
Exactly. So let's kind of split things up into chunks. Let's talk about, so we talked about technology versus audio, getting that into your car. Let's talk about the professional installation that's required of today's cars versus, again, back in the day when we were doing single DIN installs. You take a 87 911, you had power, you had ground, you had switch, you had 2 leads for each speaker, and everything just kind of matched up. Right. It was pretty straightforward, and you didn't have the possibility of messing things up. So let's fast forward to, say, a 997 or 991. What are you doing today to upgrade that stereo? And why you want to go to a professional?
So let's think about 997s at first, right? So a lot of those cars came with a Bose system. And so you've got some clients that will come in and they'll say, you know what, I love my car and I think the sound is fine, but the technology is beyond dated, right? The navigation system wasn't nice when it was new in 2006.
Right. But it was outdated by the time they put the car out on the lot because it doesn't update.
So they'd like to have Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, they'd like to have Bluetooth, they'd like to have a USB port, they want satellite radio, they want a backup camera. And so nowadays you can buy a radio that can go in the dash and give you all that. The variable is if it came with a Bose system, this factory radio, right, where there were going to be speaker wires, there would be a plug and then there'd be speaker wires. That's not going to be the case on a 997 or a 987 that's got a Bose system. You're going to have a couple power wires and then you're going to have a fiber optic cable coming out the back because it's got what's called a MOS system, Media Oriented System Transport. Everything's done through a beam of light. MOST. I
remember that.
So what you're doing is you're selling an interface that can convert that beam of light into something that an aftermarket radio can use, and it's got to be a product that basically can do a digital handshake with the MOS system in your Porsche or nothing works properly. So we will use an interface so that now the factory Bose system can stay in the car. If it had steering wheel controls, we've got an interface so the steering wheel controls could work. A good quality shop is going to find a place to retrofit a USB port, like repurposing a cigarette lighter socket so they're not drilling a hole in the vehicle. They're going to find an install kit that's going to look beautiful when it's done. And if you sell the car, and let's just say for the sake of argument that it's a 911 GT3 and you really don't want to screw this car up, it needs to be somebody that when they work on the car can go 100% back to stock.
Right.
So a good quality shop can do that for you.
Right, and that's a very good point because so many stereos were, factory stereos were pulled out of, let's use a 87, or that looks like a 993, I believe. So that's a single DIN radio right there. And back in the day, that single DIN radio was pulled out and they put in a Sony or something like that. I think that's a modern day Blaupunk
Bremen. So if you noticed where the cassette deck would be, there's an SD card slot and a USB port.
So that is a modern radio with a classic look, and that looks very handsome, very close to its original. But if you want to go a step further, then we have the radios from Porsche Classics
Right.
singled in that actually has all the Apple CarPlay. It is a small screen, but keep in mind you're working with the real estate that's available.
Absolutely.
But you have Apple CarPlay, you have the media player, and all of that. You can do that fairly easily on a 993 and older car because it's a lot less complicated. And not only is the MOST system complicated, but just think about the safety systems in a 997. And probably the scariest thing for me in working on a newer car is triggering the airbag light or triggering a check engine light because you disconnected something. If you go to a shop that is not well versed on working a Porsche, if they happen to trigger, let's say, one of those lights and they don't have the tools to reset those lights, now they're going to put it back on you and say, okay, well, we did the stereo install, but you're going to need to take it to the dealer to have someone reset it. They can certainly do that at a dealer, but it's going to cost you because nothing is free. And so again, having a professional understand not only the stereo side of it, but understanding your car, your Porsche, and being able to put the stereo that they have available for you into your car and integrate it so that, and you made a very good point, is when you do these installations, some of this stuff will get outdated. The stuff that you're putting in today into your car will get outdated, and at some point, this Macan, you might want to restore it to its original condition where you'll want to put back the old stuff and you don't want to go grab your factory head unit and then pull out whatever was in there and find out all of your wires were hacked. And now you can't put the old stuff back.
Right. Or somebody that doesn't know how to work on a modern electrical system. They know what the term CAN bus is, but they don't understand what it is. And so they integrate with it improperly, or they take one of the wires and think it's a ground wire. Next thing you know, your whole CAN bus system goes down and the car doesn't start. Right.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's not rocket science, but working on a modern automobile is a lot harder than it used to be. And if a person is going to be an audio technician for you, they're not a parts swapper. So you have to consider that they're as much a diagnostic person.
Yep.
So they really need to know what they're doing.
Right. And also, they really need to understand, especially if they're going to be changing speakers in your car, because it's not just simply, unbolting screws, throwing a speaker in there and calling it a day, because the door is an acoustical cavity that you have to match the speaker to where it's working, and then you have the elements, making sure that they don't mess up the vapor barriers. In this case here, you've got adapters that this set of speaker. If someone was not a professional putting this in, they probably just kind of bolt it in and make sure it somehow hangs inside the door, and you probably have gaps around the speakers. So but show us what you've done, or tell us about what you've done here.
So what you're seeing there is, this is an 8-inch woofer and a 3-inch mid-range, and then what you're seeing is we use a composite material. It's known as HPDE, and then basically we create a template the first time around, and then we store that template. So then the next time we do a vehicle, we just pull the template out, and then we'll use a router, and then we will make those mounts. So the first time it might take 60 minutes to do the speaker adapter. The next time around, it's going to be done faster. But the idea is we're using the existing bolt locations for the original, that would have been a Bose car, original Bose speaker, and then we're bolting into that adapter. So we are drilling 0 new holes into your Porsche.
Perfect. And most of us keep our Porsches for a long time, and believe it or not, even little holes like that into the door, guess what? It's exposed to the elements, and after years and years, if you just Swiss cheese the interior of your door, those holes will get bigger, they'll rust and create a lot of problems. But from the audio side, what I like about what you've done there is, if you had just haphazardly bolted that speaker to the door with tons of gaps around it, the performance, you could have paid, I don't know how much that speaker is, but you could put a $500 speaker into that door, but if you didn't mount it correctly and had air gaps and such, it would sound like a $99 speaker. And
so the perfect example of that is when you go back to the air-cooled 911s, there was a period of time in the rear deck where they would put a 4x6 speaker. It looks like somebody took a 6x9 and shrunk it down, and they'd put 2 of them in the rear deck. Well, no matter how good of a speaker you wanted to put back there, it always sounded lousy because the speaker was literally mounted to the rear deck and there was no enclosure of any sort.
It was just flopping around.
So we would explain to clients, look, if you really want a speaker back there, we can do that, but you're better served putting that money into better speakers in the doors where there's at least a decent enclosure, because they're never going to sound good. So you're right. If you had gaps around where the speaker was, it's going to sound horrible.
Oh, that's my installation. So I don't know how that ended up back up there, but that's back in the day. That was what I was competing with. But anyways, so back to installation. What can one expect in terms of again, we talked about 2007 or the 997. So 2000, Damon, 2006 997. 05s. Okay, 05s on up. Now their dashes are unique, and so now you're mounting double DIN radios into that location. So do you have I guess a spacer kit? Actually, if you, Robert, can you throw up my Cayenne photo? So in 09, when I bought my Cayenne, and cheers to my buddies. So there's a trim kit there that I've installed for a double DIN radio, and I installed that back in the day because there was nothing available for an aftermarket double DIN, and my kids wanted to watch, I don't know whatever movies, they could watch movies, and we had things on the roof to watch movies, but that was an adapter that I bought. Now, are there adapters like that for each model now?
Yeah, so Rob, can you go to the picture that shows the radio that would remind you of what was in Vu's car, but it's got like a silver gray dash trim around it? That's a 997 that we did. That was on the image for the feature shot.
Okay.
If you can pull that one up.
So is that a kit, or is
that's a 997. That is a dash trim plate that we source, and then we have somebody that paints that for us to fit the 997.1 cars. If it's a 0.2 car, the dash is already black, so think your Cayenne, and you don't have to. There you go. So you'll notice that dash trim ring that goes around that radio looks so perfect.
That looks OEM.
It is right, but it's not. So So.
Wow, nice.
Yeah.
So you filled the space of the OEM spot. You've got that trim ring. Even it has the Porsche silk screened or whatever on top of it. The color looks like it matches perfectly. So now you've made that dash area a universal size. So you can put almost, I guess depth is an issue, but you can put almost any double DIN radio into that 997.
Yeah, and I think the thing that anybody would acknowledge is that there's a lot of Porsche owners that say, I want my car to still look like a Porsche. I don't want it to look like I took it to a big box store and had them change all that stuff out. An average person that doesn't know Porsche is going to walk by that car, and they're not going to know that
it's a very clean install.
Because it says Pioneer at the top. Other than that, it looks factory.
And so by now making it a universal size, you can take double DIN aftermarket radios that have Apple CarPlay, have rear camera input. You can add amplifiers. I mean, now you can customize as much as you want.
You can put satellite radio in it, and if the installer is good, he knows where to hide the antenna.
Okay, so I have to stop you right there. Do people still ask for satellite radio?
What's the average age of a Porsche buyer?
Okay,
so yes, they do.
So
and so they don't want the hockey puck sitting on their roof.
Right.
So a good installer knows where to hide it so that it can pick up the satellite signal. And
that's just interesting to me that people are still asking for satellite.
We probably do more of them on a percentage base in Porsche than we do in any other car.
Really? Interesting.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Let's just kind of go backwards a little bit because we were talking about this classic radio. So this is the single DIN classic radio. Can you put this in a 996? Technically?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, you can. However, I will tell you that you can't. It's not plug and play. The harnesses, for those of us that have been in the industry, we recognize the pins, and if you go to a good shop, if you really wanted to adapt a single DIN Porsche Classic radio into a 996, totally doable. But you got to take it to a good person. However, Porsche Classic does make a double DIN unit that fits perfectly for a 996 that accepts your factory harness. So from if you were to DIY or if you want something, double din's just going to give you more options and give you a bigger screen. Like that's what I would recommend. But to answer your question of can it be installed in a 996? Absolutely.
Gets a little tricky if it's a 996 with Bose.
Yes.
If it used fiber optic, then that changes everything.
It does. It does. But you could even, because we tried it, take this head unit as a source, but then you go completely, do high level inputs into an amplifier and just bypass all the OEM stuff if you wanted.
Correct.
But again, make sure you're going to a reputable stereo shop that knows this kind of stuff, and they'll walk you through it. I mean, again, if you were in Maryland, Mark could talk to you for hours of your options with this radio. But again, I would recommend if you have a 996, you have the space, go with the double din. You'll be much happier.
Or a 986 car.
Or a 986 car, exactly. All right, so let's talk about installation expectations when you're talking about technology, audio upgrades in a Porsche. What should our viewers be talking about when they meet their potential service provider?
I think one of the things that is, do they understand the car? And so, if a guy is putting a radio in a 2007 Toyota Camry, sometimes that might take an hour, and in a 997 it might take 4. And so if you're meeting with a shop and they're doing it the right way, and they tell you, oh, that's like a 90-minute job, I'd probably shake their hand and walk out the door, because they're finding ways to cut corners.
Yeah.
There's reasons why it takes longer to change the oil on a Porsche. There's reasons why it takes longer to do a clutch on a Boxster, and it's because this is an engineering first car. So the work is going to take longer. The good news about a Porsche is because it's so well built, they go back together better than any car that you can buy.
Absolutely.
So the reality is you put it back together and everything fits perfectly. The clips don't break when you take them apart. So, once a person knows how to work on a Porsche as a technician, they love working on Porsches because it's consistent.
But the first time you work on a Porsche, it's a little intimidating because you have to tug a little bit harder than you would in a Toyota or a Honda. And because, as you said, things are so tight. But I would also throw in there that make sure whoever you're taking it to, don't be the guinea pig. Make sure that they've worked on your model before. Again, I take even to the older cars in a G-body 911, let's say a 87 again. To take off that door panel is easy if you know what you're doing.
Right.
But if you don't know what you're doing, to take off that door panel where the power door lock rotary piece is, there's a trim piece there. And if you don't know what you're doing, people are going to try to pop that off. And when you pop that off, it actually cracks it and breaks it. That piece is actually designed to spin off, and it's like a screw, and you spin it. And again, if they didn't know that, they're going to break whatever you had, and someone's going to have to pay for it, or they're going to break it and try to mend it back together and put it back on. And if they try the mend process, or they're going to say, oh, well, there's 2 clips holding it, I guess that's almost as good as 3, you're probably not going to notice. You're going to be so happy that you got a new stereo in the car, and you're not going to notice it the first time you drive, second, third time you drive. But after a while, not having all your clips on your panels, you'll start hearing rattles. You might see leaks. And again, that's just my installation experience. Don't be the guinea pig. Make sure that they've worked out before, because odds are, they've learned a couple of things by working on these over and over.
Agreed.
Yep. All right. So, any word on the classic radio available for the 997? I'm sure it's coming. I haven't received official word, but when it comes out, I'm sure it's going to be very much like these that are plug and play into your existing harness, and you can have the technology side that you're looking for with these units. But if you don't want to wait and you want to go aftermarket, then you get a kit. Now, I guess I can mention this name. I don't even know if they're still around. Does Metra, so to speak, make kits?
Metra makes a kit.
Okay.
The several companies do. Then there are
And there's different quality kits, right?
Right. So there's install kits you can buy that are $30 and ones that you can buy that are $300.
Right.
In a Porsche, we sell many more of the $300 ones because you saw the quality of it, the fit and finish are just noticeably
And that's the
better.
point I want to make is you can say, do you have an installation kit for my 997? They can answer yes, but you should be digging deeper and saying, what kit do you have for a 997 and can I see it? Because you want to make sure the quality of that kit is not just some standard ABS plastic that, yes, it will fill the void, but it won't look matching like what we saw.
Right.
And I think that's, we all want our cars to look as OEM as possible, I would think. And the kits are different, you know,
you want it to improve the car, not to grade the car.
Exactly, exactly. So I thought would be kind of cool here, and I'm going to throw Robert, let's see if he can throw up some images for us, and we can just have Mark comment on what he thinks of these wonderful installation images.
So a light switch, what do you think? Maybe that's the remote turn on for an amplifier to turn your amp off?
Functionally, it probably works. I wouldn't recommend it. That is for a house and not for a car. So I don't know where we found that. And I don't even know what it switches because there's not even a radio in the middle of the car. So who knows what, that might even start the car.
It's a nitro switch.
Nitro switch. Okay, so I'm going to steal what Manny said earlier. Just because the box of connectors came with 60, you don't need to use all 60. Oh, and T-taps. Talk about T-taps. Some, like, people used to use T-taps back in the day. What are they and why you shouldn't use T-taps?
So the thing about a T-tap as a general rule is that what you're doing is it clamps over top of a wire and comes down around, and the idea is it pierces the wire and it's supposed to make a connection, and then it's a T because then on the one side you can plug into it, so if you need to be able to grab signal off of that wire, you can do that, right? As opposed to stripping the wire back a little bit, pulling the strands apart, you take the two pieces of wire, you wrap them around, you solder it, and then you use a good quality electrical tape on it and make a connection that way. That's just a lousy way of doing it.
So that is a shortcut that will work probably for however, maybe a year, but what happens is vibration loosens the connection, and then you'll get an intermittent connection.
Well, imagine, let's just say for the sake of argument that it works for 3 years. What if then there's a problem and you've got to try and diagnose the problem, and that's what your technician sees when he pulls the dash apart? He's good luck.
There's nothing that beats stripping back and soldering. Okay, so it looks like we were looking for a ground. And
didn't work out very well.
Didn't work out very well. And ground is very important because if you don't have a proper ground in your audio system, what does it introduce?
Noise.
Noise. So if you ever got into a hi-fi car and before you even turned on the system, you hear like this faint hum, that is because more often than not, a bad ground.
Think tube guitar amplifiers. That noise. Yeah, that's a bad thing if it's not a tube guitar amplifier.
Yes, it's not supposed to have that hum. This just gives me nightmares. Just because you bought a 20-foot cable, if it doesn't fit, buy a 10-foot cable. Don't just use the 20-foot cable and loop it around and throw it in the trunk. That is, that actually, you know what, that is, I say it jokingly because it's a mess, but that actually is a hazard. Like
absolutely, that's a fire hazard. So if somebody brought a car like that to us and then they said they wanted to buy more, we would say to them, look, the only way we can work on this car is if we got everything. And they're like, well, it works fine. And I'm like, oh, congratulations, but who knows if it's going to work tomorrow.
Right, and back in the day, we would do the same because they would come in with that, ask us to install speakers. 2 weeks later, like, something's wrong with my speakers. We're like, it's not the speaker's just going to reproduce whatever the signal is. It's kind of the mess that you have in the trunk.
We're not going to see that much in the Porsche world. It's just, the reality is that's an example of a poor install, and the sad reality is that there are times where a person could do a radio job in your 911, your Cayman, your Boxster, whatever, and if you pulled the radio out of the dash, there'd be 20 feet of wiring behind the radio. Well, what happens if a repair technician needs to work on your climate control system?
Exactly. Another good thing that we talked about earlier is when we were talking about or rear cameras in your bumper. What do you do? So say a 997 doesn't have a rear view camera. You install them so that they're nice and flush, almost OEM looking, but you do something a little bit extra just in
So
case.
we make sure that we've got a quick release connector installed because, as you guys know, on all of the Porsche sports cars, you're pulling the bumper off lots of times when you're doing service work. Well, guess what? You need to be able to disconnect the camera, because if you can't disconnect the camera, the technician's either going to say, I can't take the bumper off, he's just going to snip it.
Or he's going to snip it, or he's going to unmount it and then do the best that he or she can to remount it, and it's probably not going to be right. And then you're going to have to bring it back to the original installer. Okay, so this is how not to use self-tapping screws to mount your power wire to the positive side.
Can you back that picture up just a little bit? So you'll notice that there is a stud right there on the bottom. The guy could have taken the ring terminal and put it on the stud. Do not ask me why he didn't do that.
Why didn't you just take that 8 mil and put it right on the post that it was made for?
That was an 8 mil. I have no idea what that is.
I just guessed. I'm pretty sure it's an 8 mil.
All right,
but
I'll give it to you.
Okay, so fuses. There's reasons why you have a fuse to protect the system in case of a surge. But here, instead of using a proper fuse holder, let's sort of drop some solder and put a wire around one end of the fuse. This is highly not recommended. Oh boy. Oh, here we are. So remember we were talking about getting a good ground, which is important, but that does not mean putting 3 holes in your car to try to get a good ground. I will give them points that they did scrape off the paint. And why do we do that?
Because if you've got zinc or paint or whatever, then there's resistance there. So if you add resistance, then the quality of the ground drops.
There you go.
And in more and more cars and vehicles, like I know this is a Porsche, but like, you know, Ford F-150 is aluminum. So nowadays, like when you were doing it, you just ground it to the body. On a new F-150, we're going all the way back to the battery because the body's aluminum.
Oh, that's
not a good conductor for ground.
Right. So picking your ground spot
is important. And in Porsches, they're getting there as well.
Yeah, they're different alloys.
And if we start talking about electric vehicles, that's a whole nother hour conversation to talk about.
Right. And also when you're, again, we talk about not putting holes in the cars, but there are instances when you have to. And I can't tell you the horror stories of somebody mounting an amp under the seat and didn't realize there was a wiring harness or something, and they just put a screw and just fried like a CPU or something like that. So again, make sure whoever you're taking to understands how your car works, what they're getting into.
And we don't mean this as a buyer beware. It's just choose a trusted source. If you have somebody that doesn't know what they're doing, put brakes on your car's not going to stop. The flip side is if it's somebody that knows what they're doing, it's great. If you go to an audio shop and they know what they're doing, there's not going to be any issues. It's going to be great. They're going to know how to integrate with it. Just find somebody good.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to start wrapping up. Mark, thank you very much for coming out, bringing the car, sharing your expertise. Great to see you again. I'm glad we're not competing against each other and we're using our knowledge to help folks understand what they're getting into. Tech Tactics East, if you're in the area, February 12th through 13th. If you're going to Works Reunion Amelia, be sure to register. And by the way, we just recorded PCA's 6th podcast, Porsche Club Insider. You'll see it next week. For now, you can listen to podcasts 1 through 5. I highly recommend it. Make sure you subscribe to that. And if all goes well, we'll continue to do that, as well as future episodes of Tech Tactics Live. We'll see you next time. Happy New Year, everyone.